story was found on an old audio tape buried in a Westgate storage facility after the closure of the Orlando Mystery Funhouse attraction. Its nature is very disturbing. Listener discretion advised. It's not very often that someone can say they've witnessed true magic. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of thing where some weird performer in a cape at a birthday party calls out the numbers on a deck of cards, or pulls out a 10-foot ribbon from his hand. I am talking about things that actually cannot happen in real life. Things that even the most seasoned of magicians would look at in awe and potentially fear. Because the origin of things like this is a place much darker, much more sinister than anyone who's witnessed it can bear to admit. Which brings me to my experience. It all began in a beloved attraction I grew up nearby in the 90s, called the Mystery Funhouse in Orlando, Florida. If you had been in the area around the time, it could have been recognized as the building with the gigantic wizard head on top of it, right across from Universal Studios. The interesting thing about this place to me was that it was already kind of old and outdated, even when I started going back then. This made it a really different kind of experience than going to a place like Universal or Disney, where everything was so clean and well kept. This place had a grunge and a bizarreness to it that as a young child really had an impact on me. It also housed a bustling arcade, a laser tag attraction, mini golf course, and animatronic band, but the main attraction was definitely the Funhouse. I remember that area was pretty much always mostly devoid of guests, and as soon as you would walk past the half-stoned teenage attendant at the entrance, you would enter into the mirror maze, which was the first of many rooms. The whole thing probably took about 30 minutes for an average guest to get through, so it was pretty big. And let me tell you, the deeper you explored, the stranger it got. There was this tilted Egyptian room, a drawbridge over a water dragon, a tube slide leading into a carpeted wall that seemed to just kind of descend into black nothingness. Then there were the medieval hallways toward the center of the place. I remember in my youth, I used to shudder in fear as I would enter the fake stone archway, leading to these strangely gory sets featuring dusty medieval mannequins behind glass, performing acts of torture on each other, as well as monsters only visible from your worst nightmares. But nothing stuck in my head quite like the obese settler mannequin lady in the woods holding a bucket made from a chopped off human head, its mouth bloody and frozen in terror. This part really always got me, but I remember thinking, at least it's all behind the glass. I'm not even sure why, but I just loved that sort of creepy stuff as a kid though. Although I definitely had my limit, which one day I reached. My best friend Randy and I, whose grandfather owned the establishment and allowed us in free anytime we wanted, were doing what we used to call the maze races. This was where we would start at the entrance and attempt to get through the maze and all the rooms in the shortest amount of time. Randy was the best at it. He could do the whole place in 15 minutes sometimes. I always suspected he might be cheating, because there were these hidden exit doors throughout the place that his family had told him about, but I could never prove it. Anyways, that day, he took off through the mirror maze and left me in the dust as I slammed into one of the glass mirrors, nearly giving myself a bloody nose. That was also a thing that was often part of the maze races. Normally I would be able to catch up with him after that, but not on this day. He had truly owned me in that race. So I kind of just gave up and began to walk through, knowing I couldn't win. That was when I noticed another thing was different. As I said before, the funhouse was always mostly devoid of guests. However, after stopping briefly to take a listen, I realized that I truly was alone in there. After taking my time through the various rooms, I finally entered the musky, dark hallway with the nightmarish mannequins. As I progressed, I looked upon the familiar sets that I'd walked through so many times before, but in the first one I noticed something new. It was normally a room where a woman was strapped to a wooden wheel, while people were throwing knives at her for sport. Yet she was set up differently that day. Her body was just face first on the floor, laying instead, and the men were looking away out their window. I remember thinking it was weird that they had moved the set around, but just figured they do that every now and then. Going through a curtain into the next hall, there normally would be a bloody feast with a long table of body parts that this elite club was devouring. A Satan with these bulging white eyes overlooked the length of the table, with a half-open mouth and a crooked smile. It appeared to be a little different too, but I couldn't pinpoint why until I put my hand down on the lower portion of the wall beside me, where the large piece of dividing glass should be. Only it was not there, and when I lifted up my hand, I noticed a red liquid on my finger. I nearly panicked as I realized the figures were now no longer separated from me. Suddenly, the Satan sitting at the end of the table began to slowly rotate his head toward me. Then the rest of the group all started moving too, slowly angling their strangely stiff bodies to stare at me. The Satan started making these disturbing sounds, almost like a laugh mixed with a deep mechanical cracking, like it was maybe recorded to be a laugh, but it was heavily distorted. I immediately bolted into the next room, and there she was, a gigantic woman with the head bucket. But instead of being deep in the woods, she was standing in the hallway with me, smiling and reaching into the bucket with her hand, her mouth devouring some sort of putrid organic substance, just hanging from her mouth and dripping as she stood there staring at me. Tearing off past her, I bolted toward this rotating carpeted wheel that we used to try and spin upside down on, but were never quite tall enough to. I eventually stopped to catch my breath in this cluster of hanging bags, resembling punching bags. For a moment I felt that I had escaped from the danger, but then I saw the mannequin woman sliding towards me from down the hall. Fear surged through my veins as I took off again, this time making it all the way out of the maze and into the area where the funhouse lets out. It was one of those classic 80s dining areas, with the stage and animatronic band. This was an especially weird one, with a group known as the Whiz-Bangs up there with a wide-eyed animatronic wizard, staring out at where the audience would be. Only there was no audience. In fact, the entire attraction seemed to be completely empty now. At that moment, the wizard from up on stage perked up and turned towards me.
"We are so happy you've come, boy."
I looked around to my left and right and realized he was speaking directly to me.
"The Mystery Funhouse was built on greatness, and to keep true greatness alive requires sacrifice."
At that moment, I saw the giant mannequin woman was standing outside the funhouse down the hall, and down another hall was the Satan figure, as well as the others that were with him at the dining table, their mouths wide open.
"Come, boy. You must not delay the inevitable,"
the wizard said as his arm mechanically welcomed me up onto the stage. Tripping over one of the tables, I tore off toward the glass exit doors at the end of the arcade. Finally reaching them, I tried to pull them open, but they were mysteriously locked. Starting to slam into the glass, I realized that there was no breaking through. There must have been some kind of spell put on them. I looked out the glass to try and see if anyone was out in the parking lot to help. And that was when I saw Randy, face red with tears in his eyes, getting picked up by his mom as he stared at me from the distance. At that moment, a large hand was placed on my shoulder, guiding me back over to the dining room stage.
"Your friend has chosen to offer your life in exchange for his."
I have been trapped here ever since that horrific day. Kids come in and out, even Randy visits sometimes. Only now when he comes, it's like he can't see me, and he just walks right through me, just like everybody else. I'm not sure if anyone will ever get to hear this story, but I hope that someday someone will. There's an old tape recording room where I think they probably did the sound for the animatronics, and I'm going to try to record it there. That way, at least someone might be able to tell my family what happened to me. If I can't ever leave this place, at least giving them that might bring me some peace.